Hello, YouTube. Let's get the Twitch people here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Studio. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and it is Monday, the 16th of October. Hope everybody's doing well. I mentioned that I might not be able to do the show because I had a deadline I had to try and catch. So I wasn't able to get to that deadline, so here we are. I actually have something kind of interesting to talk about tonight for a change on our entertainment show. Some new territory. Hi to everybody out there. So it's been a while since I've been knee deep in a movie screenplay, and I've got two. One of them, I guess, is not really a problem. It's just time consuming and so on. So here's the thing. Obviously, a movie screenplay consists essentially of two different kinds of things. There's the character dialogue, and then there's the scene descriptions. And I'm going way long on both of them, but mostly the scene descriptions. I think it's got something to do with coming from, I don't know if it's because I've been doing so many essays lately, or whether it's, I don't know. Maybe I'm probably just directing it in my head, but what I find I've been doing is, for example, there's a scene where Frank Luke is a prize fighter in his senior year of Deadline. Did I say senior year of Deadline? It's because I just saw Deadline. Senior year of high school. And so he's got this kind of famous boxing match against a guy who, knocked him down in the mines. I'm real happy with him. I'm real happy with all the dialogue, real happy with all this stuff. But when it came time to write the fight, I wrote like every single punch. Luke gets in close, left jab, blah, 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 right cross. He's working the eyes. He's working. It just went on and on and on and on and on. And I was talking, he's going to get the strategy. He's going to close this guy's right eye, or left eye. Then he's going to get on his left side and keep behind him, and all of this. And it's all there. It's just a page. And really, what it should do is it should just say they fight. So there's that. That's easy enough to fix. It is it's just a matter of going back and looking at all this stuff I wrote, and then just changing a page of blow by blow descriptions to they fight. One of the things I found was that I was actually slowing myself down by trying to limit this. I just figured out I get it get it straight in a rewrite or even before I submit the draft. So I've stopped trying to edit myself, and I just keep moving, just keep going. But so that's one issue, and I just decided in this case there are so many things that are happening to this guy. It's so interesting that I basically I just decided I'm just going to write them all. I mean, I don't think it's not so much that there's not. I don't even know if it's a question of there's not enough time in the movie. The movie is getting a little bit front heavy. I'm spending a lot more time than I thought I would with Luke prior to going to his actual combat experiences, because there's so much about his young life that's just so fascinating to me, and I'm trying to get all of it in there. Anyway, I'm real happy with the dialogue, but here's a problem, and this is only really a problem you get when you're doing historical characters, because otherwise you can just pretty much let yourself go. But I've been reading a lot of his letters. I'm real happy with the sound of the dialogue. I'm real happy with just trying to get the period dialogue right. He was extraordinarily devout Catholic, So I've got this. There's a scene where he's playing football, and and he's just knocking through the line, and one of these opposing linebackers says, "Will you go down? God damn it!" And finally tackles him with two other guys, and he gets up. And he says, "Watch your language," and that kind of thing is really interesting. So my problem is, in a nutshell, and I don't even think this is a real problem. It's just bothering me. So on this script, I sold it as absolutely historically accurate, and I haven't violated that. I've been very careful not to violate that. But what I find is, I'm probably making him more interesting than he really was, and I guess on some level this should just be something I should be proud of. It's like, I guess that's really your job. I'm really glad Eric Blake just mentioned Lawrence of Arabia, I think. Somebody just mentioned it. Anyway, so Lawrence of Arabia is a great example. In fact, Lawrence of Arabia is just a perfect example. Lawrence in Lawrence of Arabia is a much more interesting guy than the actual T.E. Lawrence was. It's just inevitable, and I guess that's really it. I think that's really it. I think that basically what movies do is they take real life and refine it, get it boiled down, and then whatever's left they turn up to 11. And I suppose that as long as all of the historical things that he actually did are true, the problem is, again, kind of unique to historical figures, is that you're dealing with a real person. So my problem as a screenwriter is to make him as much like the actual Frank Luke as I possibly can, but at the same time, I've got to make him more interesting than he would be, and I think that's true for just about anybody. I'll give you a little example. One of my favorite movies is Crimson Tide. I think Crimson Tide is just a terrifically written movie, beautifully acted movie, beautifully shot movie. And it is, I would say, an extremely authentic movie. Feels like a real movie. But then I saw just a documentary, on being inside a boomer, ballistic missile sub. And the lighting is all neon lighting, and everybody's just kindly talking to each other, and they're just, it's just a little flat. But at the same time, they're on a nuclear-powered frickin' submarine that's loaded with, was it 24 Trident missiles back there? I mean, that's dramatic. So I'm just kind of wrestling with this. It's like I'm really kind of stuck on it, and I'm going to keep most of it. I'm going to write him down a little bit, but he's certainly funnier than the historical Luke, although he's not cracking jokes all the time. He's just. So here's the thing about this guy. The whole story of Frank Luke is he's just really rebellious. The guy who wrote the I don't know, Eric, was it Quentin Tarantino? Script doctor for Crimson Tide. Now, one possibility is to actually make it into something like a two-parter or a three-parter. But that still doesn't say, I got it right? Wow. So just as we were talking, Eric Blake says, do you know who the script doctor was for Crimson Tide? And I just guessed that it was Quentin Tarantino because period was about right, and he was pretty, starting to get hot, and there's something about that movie, a certain punchiness that Tarantino has. So I'm just kind of working through this in my mind, and that's a real relief too, because that's a real relief. So I'm not usually hesitating so much, I'm usually just blah, 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 blah. But in this particular case, I'm really fighting with it. I have to make him more interesting than he really was, because what he did was interesting. It's why I'm attracted to the story. What he actually did was phenomenal. He's got a life story that's it's unbelievable. And so you put all these historical things together, and then you end up with like these points, and then you have to connect these points, and you got to fill in all this other stuff. And that's just it's 100% out of raw cloth. I'll give you a great example. So one of the things that happens late in Act 1 is Luke's got a couple friends. One of them's named Bill Elder. Bill Elder was Frank's one of two best friends, and while Frank was a football star, Bill Elder actually had pretty bad case of scoliosis. He was almost a hunchback. He had a hard time even just standing straight. So from the historical record, we find that that Luke and Bill Elder went to apply to volunteer, to enlist in the U.S. Army on the, it's right in front of me here, so whatever it was, 29th of 1917, September 29th. Okay, so that's what I've got. We know Luke lives in Phoenix. We know that he went to the recruitment center in Tucson, and we know that Bill Elder went with him, and then we know that Luke got the assignment he wanted because he had just a peak physical condition, and Bill Elder was rejected by the military completely, just rejected. And when I wrote the Frank Luke episode of America's Forgotten Heroes, I think I just covered this with, that must have been a long ride home back for Bill. But now I've developed this relationship with Bill and Frank and his other friend Floyd. And so this is really helping. So what I have to do is I have to create a scene out of whole cloth. I have to just invent something that almost certainly didn't happen, that conveys the emotion of it, that just that punch in the gut. We talked about this before on Apollo 13, another historically based movie, and I'm not taking the kind of liberties Apollo 13 took, not even close. In Apollo 13, Gary Sinise plays Ken Mattingly. He's bumped from the flight 3 days before the launch, and then obviously he's very sad about it and so on, and disappointed and probably a little bit bitter. And so they've got Gary showing up at some remote location on the Cape, which makes sense. He's an astronaut. He has access to the whole thing. And he's sitting there leaning against his Corvette as Apollo 13 lifts off. And then you can just tell how heartbroken he is. And he goes back to his apartment or motel and takes the phone off the hook, for those of you that remember those things, which means nobody's talking to you. And then he basically goes in and probably drank himself to sleep. And then, as we've talked about before, as the movie occurs, what's happening up on the spacecraft occurs, and the situation's getting worse and worse and worse. In movie time, let's just call it 2 hours. In movie time, this stuff is happening, and then they're just coming back to Mattingly just every jump, right? It's just jump. So it's like on the ship, but boom, 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 boom. Where's Mattingly? There's been a problem. Walks into mission control, to the Kennedy Space Center, wherever the hell he was, Johnson Space Flight Center, and then he says, give me everything I need in the simulator, so that by the time these guys go to the moon and come back, Mattingly has worked out a plan for powering up the LEM. And if you watch it in the movie, you get the impression that he did it about finished about 15 minutes before it was needed, and that when he finally gets on the headsets and he says, hey guys, I think I got to. Is that you, Ken? Yeah, it's me. Oh, Ken, we're really so glad to hear your voice. Dramatically, it's absolutely great, and it's kind of this super truth. It's like it's how things really must have felt, but in real life, Ken Mattingly was at Mission Control. He might have been Capcom. He was sitting there for the entire launch, saw the whole thing, was there the whole way. It wasn't this last minute bring him in kind of thing. And so what is that? This is the thing that I'm really intrigued with. What is that? So when we talked about this before, I said that's not historically true. It's super true. The real Ken Mattingly is a steely-eyed missile man, and I'm sure he's rather a boring guy. He's like an engineer and a pilot, both of whom use their personalities for birth control. So you can't just, and the conversations and so on, you can't just take them. Another great example in Apollo 13. So there's this scene with Ed. Boy, I'm scattered today. I'm just kind of tired. With Ed. Come on, Bill. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Hang on a second. Somebody's gonna pop it up before I can get to it. Movie. Ed Harris. So you got the scene with Ed Harris, and probably what they know is this. They know that at some point in this first briefing, when Ed Harris is playing Gene Kranz, they know for a certain fact that at some point in the mission or in one of these discussions, Gene Kranz says failure is not an option. And he also later says, I think this is going to be our finest hour. So those two things, these are two little dots that you know about this guy. And even those two dots alone, just those two dots, tell you all you need to know about Gene Kranz. That's just I don't know how you would reduce a person's personality more thoroughly than saying at the beginning of the crisis, he says failure is not an option, and near the end of the crisis, when it looks like they may still die, he says, I think this is going to be our finest hour. So he's an optimist, and he brought them back through force of will, basically. Now, we know he said those two things, but all of that stuff with the blackboard and okay, so our guys are here, and we've got to get them to here. I kind of suspect in hindsight that I'm sure everybody in the room had a pretty clear idea of, what the actual situation was. And I guarantee you that the conversation wasn't nearly that interesting. And so now we're talking about the difference between movies and reality. And I think I oversold myself on the reality, which was causing me some serious conflict, I basically, when we got the rights for the book, which is a historical detective story, I said I want to tell it exactly the way it actually happened. I'm really committed to that. So I think that was probably one of the reasons why he agreed to do the rights for the book. And my justification to myself is, so long as Luke hits all of the things that he actually did the way he actually did them, and doesn't do things that are just plain ridiculous, then that's a realistic movie. Because you've got, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 dots of things that Frank Luke did. We know he was here for this, we know he was here for that, we know this, oh no, this, all that. And then the rest of it's up to me. I mean, I just have to invent the guy out of whole cloth. I didn't meet him, I don't know him. I got a pretty good idea of his character because I know the actions he took. I've got a rough idea about how he sounded because I've been spending a lot of time and attention on the vocabulary. But even even then, Ed Harris's Gene Kranz is a lot more interesting than Gene Kranz is. And Eric says, remember, perfect's the enemy of the good. This isn't about perfectionism. This isn't about that. This is about something really different, although I appreciate the sentiment, Eric. Yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. Marusha Dark says, I think calling it a true story rather than based on a true story is setting yourself up for an impossible bar to clear, since you'd have to get literally 100% of the details right. Well, see, here's the thing. This is the thing I'm wrestling with. I can get 100% of the details right. I'm pretty sure I can. Because his story's that good. But so many of the details has to be created out of whole cloth. I know he met this girl, Marie Rapson, that they were together for 34 days. He proposed to her, madly in love, wrote to her from the front, had a chance to go to Paris. He was famous. He's handsome. Didn't do anything, stayed true to his girl, and that's what I know. That whole relationship, I have to create that. And I'm real happy with what I'm getting. And I just need to get myself to relax about it, I guess. You know, I really think I oversold myself on this, must get everything exactly right. It's the job of a screenwriter. Now, I'll say this. I missed a great example, as usual, just wandered off the path, as usual. So, back to Bill Elder and Luke. So we know that they go from Phoenix to Tucson. We know the date that they went. We know that they went to volunteer, and then we know that Frank made it and Bill was rejected. Nothing on there about what Bill's attitude was, but I know enough about the period, and even World War I, 1917, when these things happened, I think was even more so than in 1941. It was your patriotic duty to go, and anybody who didn't go was, not the kind of guy you wanted to have around. So I had to create something that would show the audience what exactly this meant in 1917. Because if you said that today, I went in, but I just didn't pass the physical, you'd think, okay, well, so go off and be a graphic designer or something. What's the big deal? But this is the essence of the period. It's when Bill Elder is rejected completely for Army service. He's lost his identity as a man. It's got to have been devastating. It must have been just devastating. And so I wrote a scene where he's devastated. They come out of their physicals and here's another little piece of chrome that I threw in there just to make the scene interesting. I've got Luke in an examination room. He's being examined by a doctor. He does the cough test, which is a little humor there. And then the doctor says, "No, actually, your lungs are great. Your heart's good. Your lungs are good. Actually, they're perfect. You're a perfectly fit specimen." And Luke is like, "Fantastic," because he wants to get into the flying corps. And then the doctor says, "But I'm going to flunk you anyway. You're washed out." What? Why? You just told me. I don't understand. Well, Mr. Frank Luke Jr., as it turns out, I'm a graduate of, I'm a Prescott Badger and a big football fan. And as such, being defeated 83-0 is a memory you don't soon forget. And Luke says, "You were there?" And he says, "Well, for as much of it as I could take." And he just lets it hang there for a second. And then he said, "I'm just pulling your leg, Frank. You're fine. You're perfectly fit, full marks. And you mean I got in? Well, I don't know if you got in or not, but you're out of here." And he's elated. Now, that certainly didn't happen. But what that little moment does is it reminds people that he was outstanding and famous, and that helps justify his maverick behavior when he just keeps bucking the rules downstream. So that was a good scene. It certainly didn't happen, but it's a good scene, and it's an interesting scene, and it connects the very beginning of his backstory as a young man, and then connects it to what's coming in terms of all of his rebelliousness and stuff. So that's the kind of thing that a good writer should be doing. And so Luke comes bounding out of the building, looking for Bill. He looks down, he sees Bill sitting on a bench, facing away from him. He comes running out and says, "Hey, Bill, guess I got it, fantastic, it's great. Where are they sending you?" And Bill's just looking at his shoes, and and Luke is like, "Bill, what, what's the matter?" And then Bill says, he says, "Not a cook, not a clerk, nothing. I've had conscription for 4 months now. They send teams of guys out there scouring the mountains looking for runaways and cowards, and the army will take them, but they won't take me." And he's crying. And when he looks around, he's making a point to make sure that nobody sees him crying. He's just staring at the floor. "What do you mean? What do you mean, Bill? I don't understand. How can you be this dense, Frank?" He says, "They wash you out?" And he says, "Yeah." And then Luke starts getting angry and rebellious. So he just turns around, starts heading back to the building, and Elder says, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going in there to straighten this out." And Jesus Christ, Frank, he really swears. He says, "I'm humiliated enough already." The train ride up had me a chance to get Luke. Luke was it's very, very strange, because this is probably the hardest thing about him to capture. Everybody who talks to him says he was just absolutely hyperactive, and when he got worked up, he would just talk so much that he wouldn't even finish sentences or connect them. He just had this intensity about things. So I wrote a little scene of him on the way up, and Luke's all excited and talking about what's going to happen, and Elder's staring out the window of the train, and I called this guy who wrote the stand, and I said, "Hey, Steve," emailed him rather. "So here's the latest," because I'm constantly bouncing questions off of him. "All right, so here's the latest, Steve. I'm working on the scene where he goes to Tucson to enlist, he and Bill Elder. I originally thought it would be a horse ride, but the more I think about it, that's got to be a train, right? I mean, that's the main artery of Arizona. Certainly they would have taken a train, I would think." He says, "Well, nobody knows whether they do or not, but that would certainly be my guess, and I'm glad you're asking." So there's the balance, I guess, because I gotta show what Bill Elder's life is going to be like for the next 20 years or 40 or however long he lives. I gotta show what Bill Elder's life is going to be for the rest of his life, the misery he's going to be in, and I got to show that in 2 pages. I got to show that in a minute and a half, 2 minutes. So I have to just, compress it and crank everything up. I think it's a great scene. I think it's a believable scene. I really do. I really like the scene a lot. And this is what I've been wrestling with. Because when I read his letters, this is what did it. I've just read a bunch of his letters lately just to review these things, and he's not nearly that interesting. But yet he does the things that made me want to write about him in the first place. So if Quentin Tarantino can punch up Crimson Tide and make me feel like that is a genuine mutiny on an actual nuclear submarine, then I feel like I'm forgiven this. The place where I don't want to go off the rails is I haven't compressed characters. It would have made a lot more sense for Bill Elder and his other friend Floyd to have been the same guy, but they weren't the same guy, and it's better that they're not the same guy. So anyway, that's that, I guess. You're just when I think about Lawrence of Arabia, which I think is probably the best biopic ever made, and maybe the best movie ever made. I know what T.E. Lawrence did, and I know what T.E. Lawrence looked like, and he didn't look like young Peter O'Toole because nobody looks like young Peter O'Toole. And it's the difference between history and storytelling. It's the difference between history and entertainment. Because the one thing I have to do with Luke, really, is only one thing I have to get right about Luke. Maybe I'll make him funnier than he was, or maybe I'll make him, maybe less abrasive than he was, because I like him. I like him. I admire him. I admire what he did. So Luke can be. There's only one thing that Luke cannot be, or let me rephrase. There's only one thing really that in Luke's character that has to be there. It doesn't have to be his rebelliousness. It doesn't have to be his patriotism. It doesn't have to be his extraordinary feats. It doesn't have to be accurate portrayal of his relationship with his friends or his fiancée. The one thing that Frank Luke has to be in this movie is he has to be interesting. And that's where the nub of the issue is, really. Since this is the show we talk about show business type things and the creative process working on movies and stuff, that's ultimately it. He's got to be interesting, because real life people are not so interesting. That's why we write them. And I'm really happy with the balance of I'm really happy with the way that the fictional Luke, just kind of like a spline going through pegs. I'm just really, really happy with the way that character is just going through all of these things that actually, happen. So, for instance, we know for a fact that when he was starting his flight training, early in his flight training, that his girlfriend, who he wanted to impress, came to Rockwell Field, which is now North Island Naval Air Station. And she came down, and then we know that Frank, would show off. So, I don't know what that means. I mean, that could be him, flying around and maybe doing a tight turn and stuff. But he later wrote bragging about doing 8 loops in a row and how he was inverted and his engine cut out and he got into a spin. He didn't think he'd save it, So we know that he did that because he said so in a letter back to his dad. So for that scene, I've got Marie, who's relatively new in this relationship, just met him not too long ago, and she's standing on the fence at the perimeter of Rockwell Field, and all of these Curtiss Jennies are taken off, and the Jenny was a relatively safe airplane, but nothing like, well, it's a trainer. It's nothing. It's supposed to be close enough to a combat aircraft to give you a good introduction to how to fly. So I've got this scene where these 80 horsepower Jennies just, they're just hanging on their propellers, just climbing out at what is that, VY, I guess, their best rate of climb speed, and they're and the scene before, he invites her down to come and watch, and she says, "Well, how will I know which is you?" And he says, "You'll know." So you see these guys going overhead in all these different numbered airplanes, and she looks up and she sees all she sees is goggles, leather cap, these droning things, and she wants to wave, but she doesn't want to wave at the wrong guy, and she certainly doesn't want to be seen waving at the wrong guy. So just when she's getting a little nervous, all of a sudden you hear this sound that's not a drone. It's like a roar, and it's getting louder. And so instead of, we've just watched 3 students, 4, just, as soon as they got to rotation speed, and what I did was, I've got Luke punching the throttle, gets the wheels off the ground, he holds it at 2 feet, flat and level, and he's just picking up airspeed. He's just accelerating because he's not climbing. So instead of this low droning, she has this roar. And by the time he gets to the fence, he passes 5 feet over, pulls up, takes as much of the energy he's got with him, gets to the top, goes inverted. It's a gravity-fed engine. The fuel is based on gravity. It's not pumped in under pressure. So if you went inverted, your engine would cut out. So that's exactly what happens. And I show him doing this on purpose. He closes the throttle. He goes inverted. the engine sputters. She's down on the ground. Oh my God. And then he comes down, does a couple spins, and as he's doing the spins, he can hear the engine coming back because he's more or less upright, brings the throttle back in, kicks the thing out, and then just aims right for her and passes, 3 feet over her head, just enough, so that she ducks. And as she ducks, he blows her hat off, and he's climbing up there, and she's waving at him, and he turns around and waves back, and he does a little roll on the way out. Then he does his practice flight. Now, that he did show off for her, but I virtually guarantee you he didn't do that. But the purpose for writing that scene that way, see, this is interesting, at least interesting to me anyway. What a scriptwriter has to do in a case like this, and it doesn't matter whether he's a fictional character or not. You only have 2 hours to tell this story, and you've got a lot of story in there. So the reason I wrote that scene more dramatically than it really was because it wasn't true, it was super true. And the super truth here is that Luke was a natural born pilot, and that he was so fearless that he was doing maneuvers that would be considered advanced combat maneuvers just to show off. He just didn't care. He very likely could have gotten himself killed, probably should have gotten himself killed, and was in fact a safety hazard later on. But I can't just say, hey, that Luke is a natural pilot, And doing it this way is like he's still a student, and he goes inverted and, does that to impress his girlfriend. Well, that's how far ahead of his group he was. So I've got a scene. Sometimes you get to put in just stuff that that you want to put in. So I was looking at at pet names in the 1910s. This is 1917. I was looking at couples' pet names for each other, and I'm looking at the list of names for women, and it's Honey, and and all this other stuff. And Baby didn't come in until I don't know, the 40s, and all the history of all these pet names. And one of the pet names that was popular then was Buttercup. So I thought, well, that's interesting. What's the geographical distribution of Buttercup? We've already established that Luke is out there camping a lot. Is it possible that he could have seen a field of buttercups? Because when the desert blooms, it's actually really spectacular. I've seen that. And I look, and it's like, here's the distribution. I literally Googled Buttercup distribution Arizona. And it turns out the northern part of Arizona has got some buttercup action. So he's talking about how we went on a ride with Bill Elder. And she makes a joke about Prescott High School, which is kind of a running joke through the first part of this thing. And he says, I was riding with Bill, and was our longest ride ever is 120 miles. Well, maybe not the longest one ever, but anyway, because that's how we talk. And he says, and we started seeing these patches of yellow, and then we went over the edge of this crest, and then what I saw just took the breath away. What did you see, Frank? It was just like this sea of gold. The sun was setting, and it was just so beautiful, Marie. I really would like to take you out there and show that to you sometime. What was it? It was a sea of flowers. What kind of flowers? He says, well, it was buttercups. Buttercup. And she's smitten with this guy. Do you mind if I call you Buttercup? And she says, no. Under one condition, you can't scare me like you did today, Frank. And there you go. Then I got a chance to put in some backstory and some exposition and give them something important to talk about rather than just the weather. They're on the beach, on a sand dune. They're just sitting there, and the sun's going down, and she's saying, you can't scare me like you did, really, it's just more than I can take. And he said, I was just having a little fun with you. She says, when you went inverted up there, and when you went upside down up there and your engine cut off, I was sure you're going to have to use your parachute. And he says, we don't get issued parachutes. She says, why not? The Germans have them. I saw it in Collier's. And Luke says, yeah, the Germans have them, the Tommies don't, and I don't know about the frogs. And she becomes outraged about this because, and I put in it as a scene description, Marie had put a lot of hope into parachutes. You know, she knows this guy who's the love of her life is going out there to do something dangerous, so she's consoling herself with the idea of parachutes. And then he says, nope, we don't get them. And she said, that's outrageous. Those rotten Huns get them and our guys don't get them? Why? And then Luke, he says, well, the official explanation, and then Luke tells her what the official explanation was, because in reality, in World War I, Allied aviators were not issued parachutes. German pilots had them, certainly in the later part of the war. Balloon observers always had them, because they had to just get out of there in a hurry. But the reason that they didn't issue parachutes, and this has always bothered me so much, the reason that they didn't issue parachutes, and this is the verbatim explanation, was that the addition of a parachute would make it more likely for the pilot to bail out and not fight as hard, and therefore they'd lose an airplane. That's the actual genuine reason why they specifically withheld parachutes from the Allied fighters. And I don't know how many men died because of this lunacy, but he tells her that, and she says, that is insane, that's ridiculous. He says, welcome to the Army. Now we're setting up this conflict between Luke and authority, and this is a great case of authority being just dead wrong. And Marie's like apoplectic over this, you know. She says, so not only are our boys not worth as much as the Huns, they're cowards as well, on top of it. You know, welcome to the Army. And then she says something that I've always wanted to say when I thought about this. She says, well, does a battleship cost more than an airplane? He says, yeah, it costs a lot more than an airplane. Okay, well then by that logic, she says, why do they issue life preservers to the sailors? Wouldn't that make them more likely to just jump overboard and give up the battleship? And that's when Luke realizes he really loves this girl. Because she's not only concerned about him, but she's clever and she has the same attitude about it. And he says, yeah, it never occurred to me. I'll cable President Wilson about it in the morning. So there's a little bit of that humor that he may or may not have had, but I just thought that was a great scene, and it was a good scene for them to be talking on the beach, and it really shows them coming together, and it does a lot of cool things, and so I'm real happy with this script. I'm real happy with it. I'm real happy with the way that the intercuts between the beginning and the end of his life, of his story anyway, work, because we start off seeing, we start off on a blank screen. You hear these German officers talking. You just hear this, you know, wait, hold your fire, and you hear this sound of this engine. Luke comes around behind this hill, and they open fire on him, and he shoots down this balloon. And this is chopped up and intercut. We do these flashbacks to him that aren't really flashbacks; they're flash forwards. But the beautiful thing about it is you can see Frank Luke when he's 16 playing football, and you can see him on, this is the most dramatic one, you can see him on his graduation photo from Rockwell Field, and then you cut to him in his plane on his last mission, and in the year, he died 1 year to the day after he started his training. And in that 1 year, he looks like he's aged enough to become his own father. And that's a good war story, too. You know, what this does to people, what it does to their nerves, and all combat, but there was something about aviation, specifically World War I aviation, and a lack of a parachute was a lot of it. So these young guys, when I say young guys, I mean they're 17, 18, 19 years old. They're kids. They're just kids. And they go up there, and they know that they could just get shot to pieces. They know that their planes are frail, and that the wings, come off if you You pull too hard on the stick, you could rip the wings off a Newport, or if somebody shoots a strut out or something, you're still flying, but the wing could come off anytime. But mostly, and this is pretty much universal when you read deeply into the diaries of these guys, these young men, the one thing that they all feared and was very common was fire. It was really not at all unusual when a guy got shot down for the bullets to ignite the fuel in the engine, and that spray of fuel is on fire and is coming straight into the cockpit. And a lot of guys, I mean hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men, died on fire on the way down. And these guys are, when you hear them talking about it, pretty much universally say, well, I've got my service revolver with me, so push comes to shove, I'll just end this more quickly. There's a significant number of those guys made the same choice that the 9/11 jumpers did, and that is, every instinct in my body is telling me to get away from this fire because it's burning me, so they just jumped out of their planes. There's a confirmed story of one or two guys who jumped out of their planes specifically hoping to be over a river, and they were over a river, but hit a river at terminal velocity, it's like hitting concrete. So they're in a state of constant, perpetual fear, and none of them are allowed to show it. And the reason everybody hates Luke, this is historical record, is that Luke was not only fearless, he would just constantly brag about it. And he would brag about how he's going to shoot down this or that, and you got these experienced guys, they're just listening to this brand new guy come in, and it's like, will you shut up, Luke? Would you shut up, please? Luke was bragging about this plane that he shot down, his first kill. It's pretty certain that he actually did get the plane, but he never got confirmation for it. So they kept teasing him about it, and they said, Luke, you couldn't shoot down this is a direct quote from one of his squadron mates. Luke, you couldn't shoot down a YMCA tent, a YMCA tent if it was staked into the ground. And that's a great line. So he's just despised. And then all of a sudden, he does it. So anyway, final thing is, well, I don't know how final it is. The other thing is, I found a title that I like. So you've got three obvious choices here, right? You can either call it The Stand, which is the name of Steve's book, but you can't call this The Stand because The Stand is so famous as a movie title, as a miniseries title. You just can't. It's just off the table. So you could call it Frank Luke, which is accurate, but I wouldn't say it's particularly inspiring. It doesn't tell you much of anything. Or you could use his nickname, which is the Balloon Buster. Frank Luke, the Arizona Balloon Buster. That's how he went down in history. Frank Luke, the Balloon Buster. There was a book about him in 1966, I want to say, called Balloon Buster. And it was the first real, modern telling of Frank Luke's life. And so I thought, I don't like any of those three at all. I don't like any of them. And then I found a title I really do like a lot. Because what Luke did in 9 days has never been matched. I mean, you read about his relationship with this guy, Joe Werner, and you think that these guys have been flying together for months. It was, 3 missions, 4 missions. And I'd like to do the research on this because I don't think it's ever been matched. I don't think anyone has ever shot down as many enemy aircraft as in as short a time as Frank Luke did. I think he shot down more stuff because he did it in 9 days. Somebody said this was that was the most impressive winning streak in aviation history. And I said, there's the title right there. I got it. I'm calling it The Streak. And I'm calling it The Streak because obviously we're telling the story of this astonishing command of the air. And it's also that's what he was. He was a streak. He was like a streak across history. He did everything super fast, just burned out and just gone, like a meteor. And he attacks like a streak. The airplanes that they switch to, when he gets there, they've got Newport 28s, which are light and agile, and they turn fast. They're pretty good dogfighters. No, not 9-day streak, the streak, because the streak has double meaning. The double meaning is, yes, the streak of what he actually did, but the streak, he's the streak. And when he starts his first day of the streak, there's a little subtitle that goes to screen goes to black, and then it just says the streak. And then we tell the story of what he did in those days. Or what was I going to say about this? I don't think it's ever been equaled. And I think one of the most impressive things I ever read about him was that his commander, Mirsha Dark, says the streak, the true story of Frank Luke. See, that sounds like an essay or a history book. The streak sounds like a movie. I don't think it's ever been equaled. And there's just so much tension and drama there. It's just fantastic. So anyway, I took everything I knew about him historically, and I created the kind of character that would do the things that he did. And as I say, as long as I'm just touching the basis of reality and not, he's on the state championship team. It's Phoenix versus Prescott. They beat him 83-0. Luke is a fullback. He was a short yardage guy. He just ran straight ahead. I thought, okay, that's who he is. He runs straight ahead. He whenever there's a problem, he goes right at it, and he doesn't stop until he gets there. And that's why now you get into some of the. Didn't Robin Olds shoot down 5 Krauts in one mission? Dave Big Booty said yes. A number of people have done it. Robin Olds did it. Chuck Yeager did it, and Frank Luke did it. Ace in a day, they call it. 5 kills on one mission. So when the streak, Eric, it's not unbeatable streak. It's not electric streak, boogaloo. It's the streak. It's a great title because that's what he was. And oh, come on, I just keep losing this point. What was it? I hate it when that happens. It'll come back to me in a minute. Anyway, that's what I've been up to. We have a super chat over here, by the way. Sacred Order of Knightly Valor for 500 yen. The facts make it interesting. Your poetic license makes it exciting. Well, thank you for that. That's really profound. Yeah, when we do the sequel to this guy who died at 22, we'll call it, Frank Luke 2 Electric Boogaloo. I remember the Spads. So when they get there, they're issued Newport 28s, which are light airplanes. They got a pretty good turn. Their performance is okay for a late war fighter, but it's no match for the Fokker D7 rather. It's just not a match for it. And then they get the Spads, and the Spad 13 is by far the strongest fighter of the First War. It looks by far the coolest of the airplanes of the First War. It looks like a bullet. It's just a tank. It's a barrel. And a lot of the pilots didn't like it because it was a little slow on the hang on, Mershadar says the guy who shot down the Chinese spy balloon had a call sign homage to Frank Luke. I clicked on the link. I don't know what that was. It didn't take me to the page I was hoping it would. If you could tell me what the call sign was, that'd be great. So anyway, the rest of these pilots, most of them don't like the SPAD because it's slow in the turn. But Luke loved it, and it was Luke's airplane because the visibility, it was like looking through a letterbox. SPAD had maybe the worst visibility of any fighter in the war. It was horrible. But it was built like a tank, and that's exactly the kind of person Frank Luke was. When I show him playing football, I make a point of saying what the people said about him. He has no moves. He doesn't jink. He doesn't spin. He just runs straight ahead so intensely that he just keeps knocking kids down, bigger than him. So we see that. Then he gets his airplane, and it's a fullback's airplane. It's a straight ahead, in your teeth airplane. And so I had to have a scene where these guys are discussing this, and I had to think of a way for Luke to express to them why he was in favor of the SPAD, which of course made him more unpopular. And what I ended up with is, he says, you guys, he's saying, there's no way that, that thing can't turn, and yeah, it's fast, and yeah, it's strong and everything, but that's not going to do you any good, when you're shot down, we got bullets in you or whatever. And Luke is listening to this, and again, he's an upstart, he just thinks he knows everything. He says, no, you guys got this all wrong. Right there, everybody just wants to hate his guts. No, you got this all wrong. You're thinking about this business as guys like having a sword fight. What do they call those swords? Where the real light ones? The musketeers thing, like the musketeers. That musketeer sword. What's that called? Is it a rapier? Yeah, like a rapier. You think that this business that we're doing up there, you think this is like a rapier fight, but it's not. It's not. It's a saber fight. You go in there as hard as you can, and you just slash, and you keep going. And there's no better plane for that than the SPAD. And that's a hell of an interesting analogy for it, but that's how he fought. That's how he fought the SPAD. He basically just got way high, went tearing through these formations, shot the hell out of whoever he could, and just zoomed on out and kept his energy up, and he didn't get into turning fights, which I think is just cool. Because I got a line there where when they're riding the train up to Phoenix, talking with Bill Elder, he said, hey, Bill, you remember when the war started, we were talking about this 3-4 years ago? We decided that if we, because they went camping all the time, decided if we ever got called up that we'd join the cavalry. Said, who would have thought that you could fight a war without cavalry? I mean, who would do the scouting? Well, it turns out it's airplane now. I do feel sorry, though, he says, I do kind of feel sorry for those horses, though, because I heard they got tore up real bad taking supplies up to the front. I bet you, thousands of horses were killed doing that. And Elder's worried he's going to get flunked out, and he's looking out the window, he's not paying much attention. He says, yeah, they think it's pretty close to 4 million. No, that's impossible. There's not 4 million horses in the whole world, Bill. He says, well, yeah, 4 million. I read it in Life magazine. How did they get 4 million horses across the channel? He says, no, it's 4 million total, Frank, for Allies and the Central Powers. Oh, well, the Hun horses don't count, A horse is a horse, Frank. Well, yeah, but I mean, if any sensible horse on the other side would have just bolted for the Allied lines, So that's it. But that's a nice little piece of business. It establishes their friendship. It talks about why he wants to be in the air service. We've seen him on horses for the last 25 minutes. And so I have to have these guys saying something. And that's another one of these little things that I get to throw in, like the parachute thing. The 4 million horses killed in World War I. 4 million horses. Before the movie Chinese balloon goes down. No, I'm not going to do that either, I'm afraid. 4 million horses is a lot of horse. That's a lot of horse flesh out there. They suffered terribly in that war. Germans were still using them extensively in World War II. Everybody's making Mr. Ed jokes now. I love that show. I just thought that was a great show. I really love that show. Anyway, that's what I've been working on, so let's see if we can do some questions here. Oh, mercy me. I cannot believe I forgot to lead with this. Some good news. We are getting a completely new website redesigned from the ground up. The bid that I accepted on Fiverr said that they could do it in 3 days. So let's say end of this week. And that is long overdue. We've had people who just signed up for memberships recently with this latest push, and the site's not working, and that's just mortifying. It's been cobbled together over a long time, and it's slow and it's kind of ugly. And I've been wanting to do something about it for a long, long time, and now we are. And the contract says, by the end of this week. So this time we're going to beta test this thing. Last time we tried this was right on election night in 2020, and the site just went down, and everybody was really, really, really angry. No, Eric says, are members going to have to sign up again? No. When I put up the bid, I said, here's what I need. Number one, as the first thing, number one, it cannot involve any more work on our members. It's got to take their existing passwords and their existing usernames, got to talk to Recurly like that. That is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. I said, second thing that's essential is we need to preserve all of the existing posts and the comments as well. I didn't talk I said that we needed a forum. I didn't specifically say we needed to port the old forum stuff over, but I think that was pretty clear from the rest of this stuff. I mean, those things were they were starred things on the top. That's the first thing I talk about. Anyway, that's that. So we're going to have a brand new BillWhittle.com site. We're going to open up a spoiler alert website, and then we'll have a major Mace Mattingly website. So the spoiler alert website will post nothing but spoiler alerts. The Mace Mattingly thing will post nothing but Mace Mattingly. I'll have links to the Stratosphere Studio showing some of the behind-the-scenes stuff on Mace Mattingly. I'll activate Super Chat, Super Thanks, all of that stuff. We'll post it on Rumble, and we'll get it on Twitter. We're going to do everything. We had a great conversation on the last Stratosphere Lounge show where they're talking about all the money I was just leaving on the floor, and it's like, oh, that's not a good place for the money to stay. So BillWhittle.com will have everything. The reason I'm keeping the others separate is because, the whole idea, the whole premise of this is to get around the algorithm and reach people that we hadn't reached before by not talking about politics. So I don't want to post, if I post a major Mace Mattingly thing or something and they come to my page and they see me talking about how great Trump is, we lose some people. I don't want to do that. So that's how that's going to work. But the website's crazy slow, and it just can't hang together anymore. And I'm going to do a big membership push when we start the first of these interview shows with John Voight, and it's got to be working. And a number of people said, hey, can I be a beta tester? Yes, you can. This is something I'm interested in too. Is it? I can't tell. Is it? I just hate getting people's name wrong. I'll Paint says, have you seen the Vegas Sphere? It would make the world's coolest planetarium show. I've not been there, obviously, but I have seen some of it. So I think it's absolutely brilliant. For those not familiar with it, these shows like Mandalorian were done in what they're calling a volume, an LED volume, where they've got, essentially they're just TV screens, but they're very, 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 very high resolution. And so the screen is actually lighting the scene. If you've got the sun in the sky, it's going to produce enough light to put the highlights on the face, and it's really remarkable how effective it is. They have built in Vegas this enormous, I mean, it just, from the video I've seen, it's just enormous sphere with staggered seating, and it's essentially completely surround experience, and it is retina limited resolution. So I don't know how many video cards they got running the thing. I'd be willing to bet you they got 400 or 500 of them, something like that. In any event, I get the script delivered. I'm taking Natasha to Vegas, and we're definitely going to see whatever's in there because I really want to see that very much. I mentioned before that I've seen some clips from concerts where they have AI animated backgrounds, which are constantly evolving. And every time I see one of these, I think, wow, that's really incredible. It really is. It's incredible visually, incredible. But it is not human. It is just not. It is an alien. It's not an intelligence exactly. But whatever it is creating images that are so disturbing and creating them in such a disturbing way. You know, you'll see something like a hallway or something, and it morphs into like the skull of a monkey screaming or something like that, you know, and it's like, what? But nevertheless, I very much want to go see that, so thanks for bringing that up. Anyway, good news about the website, and this time we're going to run some tests on it, make sure it's working. Probably on the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm hoping we'll be able to have a link to it on the Stratosphere Lounge. We'll take a look at it on the on the Parallel site, and then when we're sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do, then we'll just put it up. And the contract specifies in great detail that the number one importance of this thing is that a member should be able to simply go to the website using the same link that they always use and come in there and find a brand new website and find themselves already in the membership door, and they didn't touch anything. That was the consideration. And you know, the web developer we found in Indonesia said that that they could do it, and we actually got approached by somebody on the phone, someone in India talking about, we can do a brand new website for you. And the price they quoted was not great, but it wasn't crazy. And I've just changed an awful lot in the last 4 months in terms of not being so stupid about things. So I said, okay, well, let's... I said to our office manager, Shelley, I said, write him back or call him back and tell him I want to see a link to his Upwork or Fiverr pages. And, I mean, this guy's like hot for the job. And a few moments pass, and then she says, they don't have a Fiverr page, but here's a list of, he gave me a long list of phone numbers that you can call of the various businesses that they've worked for. And I said to myself, well, that's convenient. If I call any one of these numbers, you know, if I dial one number, it's going to say what it says on the form. I can call, you know, Stratosphere Insurance Company to hear about their website, whether it was well done or not, and that'll go to a call center. And every time that number rings, they answer Stratosphere Insurance. And when the other number rings, they answer, you know, Mammoth Moving Enterprises, and so on and so on and so on. I want something independent. They couldn't provide it, so see ya. The person we ended up hiring had 36 reviews, and all of them were 5 stars, and that was good enough for me. So there's that. Oh, one last thing. I went down with Natasha to Santa Monica earlier today just for a little routine little medical checkup that she had to do. So she was just in there very briefly, and I went across the street to this like super hippie kind of market, you know, as a farmer's co-op, and a lot of patchouli smell in there, you know, and everybody's, you know, wearing, you know, they're fully reusable hemp, you know, clothing and all the rest of it. So I just went in there to get some water and some flowers, and as I'm standing in line there's a bit of a ruckus at the front door, and I see this big guy fighting with this woman over a big bag that she was holding. And I didn't know if he was assaulting her. She looked more or less normal. And I'm watching this, and she's shouting, and he's not saying a word. He's just reaching into the bag and pulling stuff out of the bag. And then she storms off. And it's like she just walked in there and just put them in the bag and went out. Just took them. Because she knows that nothing's going to happen to her. Nobody's going to hold on to her. Nobody called the police. Yep, shoplifter, Lord Bios, the biggest, baddest kind of shoplifter. And it was so matter of fact, especially the look on the security guard's face. You know what he looked like? He's in a physical confrontation with this person, and the expression that I got from him was he looked bored, like he has to do this a lot. Bored. He looked bored and annoyed, not adrenalized at all. So I'm waiting to pay for this stuff. The woman's gone. I'm walking out of there thinking, good Lord, that's where we are now. Start walking over to Natasha's car, and as I'm walking across the street, I see that this woman is standing, 20 yards to the right, so 20 yards behind the car, and she's up against this building, which was some kind of institute of something or other, and she's fuming mad. And as I'm walking across the street towards Natasha's car, this woman picks up a rock and throws it against the window on this institute as hard as she could. And it put a hole about that big in the glass, and then she went storming off down the street. And I thought, well, this is what's happening. I'm thinking about, we talked before about, on the last Stratosphere Lounge show, about the things to come thing, and whether people could handle the informality of what was essentially a firewall in this format here, and people said no, they liked it, thought it was okay. Did we lose the YouTube stream? Because I haven't seen anything from them. In any event, I don't know why I'm not getting anything. Oh, because I left YouTube, that's why. To go check that thing out. Anyway, so let me log back into that. Anyway, so the thing was called Things to Come, and yeah, I just haven't seen the comments. That's because I went to that link. Okay, so it's called Things to Come, and I think actually that I might be doing a series on that because that's kind of where I've been, in terms of headspace in the political side. It's like, all right, I have a feeling that I have an idea of the rough shape of this crisis that we're heading for. And I like the title, Things to Come. And just as an example, sometimes I'm just driving down the street and I get an idea. So one installment of Things to Come could be just language. And could talk about how during the Civil War, the language was so unbelievably articulated and ornate, and the vocabulary was huge. If you read Civil War letters today, they seem overwritten. They're too flowery. They're just too sentimental. Mark Twain went at that real hard. One of the best essays Mark Twain ever wrote was what's it called? I get the exact title. If you really are interested in writing, you won't be able to beat this. It's online, it's free, you can just Google it anywhere. It's called Mark Twain's, an essay called Fenimore Cooper's Literary Offenses. And he basically just takes a look at scenes from, Last of the Mohicans or something like that. And he just takes like one paragraph and he just rips it to pieces. He says that they commit, of a possible 38, offenses to readable literature, he gets 35 of them in this one paragraph. I cannot recommend it highly enough. So anyway, there's a difference between flowery writing and good, clear writing, but the things to come thing about language is we've gone from that to level of language and articulation that I grew up with, and then we get we start getting the internet contractions, IMHO, LOL, BRB, all those things, and now we've got emoticons, and we're not even using words anymore. We're talking with, I mean, just look at the comment section on people's videos. If somebody's really angry about something, they don't say, this is disgusting and disgraceful, and then tell you why. They put this animated, red-faced emoticon up there, and it's like, okay, if you can't articulate a thought, you really can't have the thought. That's the whole purpose of 1984 and Newspeak. The idea of reducing. I was so proud they took 60,000 words were removed from the dictionary in the 7th edition. The more simplified you make the language, the more simplified the thinking gets. It can't help but be that, because you have no shades of nuance, because you don't have words for them. My understanding is, and I've been wrong about these things because they're hearsay, but my understanding is that in French, the word for sky, certainly I think what I remember, the word for sky and heaven are the same words. I'll say a big difference between sky and heaven. Big difference. Jay Coulter there, smiley face 100%. There you go. That's how people are communicating now. And we've gone from using just, simpler and simpler and simpler sentences to abbreviations, to, let's see, 11th edition, thank you, to pictographs. And that's something that we should be concerned about. And I know for a certain fact that every generation that has ever lived on planet Earth has said that the music that their kids listen to is nothing but noise. I understand that. I get it. I really do. But I think you could actually make a case for, like a legally defensible case that the music that's out there now is as simple as emoticons. I'm not saying I have to like it. I'm just saying it is a click track with really pretty uninteresting, hip hop lyrics, but it's just a click track. That's all it is. It's a click track that there's no bridge, there's no nothing. It just click track, and it's just guy talking about how pissed off he is about this or whatever, and that is limiting. I was lucky enough with the planetarium background to grow up surrounded by all kinds of different music, but a lot of classical music. And first album I ever bought was Bach's Brandenburg Concertos. They talk about a Czech magnet, but that music is complex music, and you don't have to. It's not that I don't like rap because I don't like it. I don't like it, but the main problem I have with it is it's just a matter of generational taste. I get that. But the main problem I have with it is so reductive. It's so unbelievably basic. Put it on a music sheet, and you've got ding dong ding dong ding dong ding 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 dong ding dong. That's it. That's all. And I really do think that is affecting people's ability to think. I don't get a chance to listen to it much anymore because I'm universally busy doing other things. However, I do remember that the ending of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy thing, is just so triumphant and emotional. It's like it's got the same quality. I personally think that John Williams' theme for Superman is maybe the best piece of classical music I've ever heard. But it's got that kind of energy. It's just this, and the challenge is to not fast forward to the very ending where they start doing the singing, and just listen to the whole thing. But that takes 20 minutes. And I also noticed that if you go to shopping malls or anywhere in public, even though these malls are, or wherever, they're playing music from the 60s and 70s. Sometimes I have all 80s night. I love the 80s. Some songs from the 90s. I don't hear anything that was recorded in 2014. So, the reason this might be an interesting things to come episode is prepare yourselves for dealing with I don't want to even say opponents. Prepare yourself for having to repair the damage of people who don't know how. They can't think. It's not even that they don't want to. It's just they can't. It's just the connections are not there. It's like the thing about the surgeons, how they're taking twice as long to do surgery now, because the surgeons that are coming up are perfectly brilliant, but they have no manual dexterity. They never played with what's a mall exactly. Had that thought myself actually. What's a mall? They never had to put in change a spark plug. They never played a musical instrument. They never did anything that required assembly, disassembly. Never made a plastic model airplane. Never did any of those things. And the most important thing that they didn't do is they didn't do cursive handwriting. So they've got these surgeons now who are learning how to be surgeons, and the instructor surgeons, guys in their 50s, are watching these guys, and they don't have the ability, the mechanical ability to Jay Coulter says, or unhook a bra strap. Yeah, exactly. If you can do that with one hand, your man pass is stamped for another 20 years. They don't have the ability to be that precise. They just can't do it. If they were to play Operation today, it'd be nothing but buzzer. So anyway, I think that's what I'm going to be doing in terms of the straight politics thing. Versus, I think what you're missing is that most of the good music is online these days, almost exclusively. Fair enough. I'm sure there's a lot to that. But I don't think there's any question that the stuff that's coming out of the speakers of cars is real different than the stuff that was coming out of the speakers of cars, 30, 40 years ago. And I think that some of these 70s rock ballads are much better orchestrated than tunes in the 20s, so you get that. Is YouTube stealing Super Chats? No, they're not. They are paying me for Super Chats, so that's wonderful. We certainly appreciate them. I'll mention the Dark Side of the Moon. That's a brilliant piece of work. Anyway, those darn kids, get off my lawn. Let's do some questions, why don't we? Boy, I'm looking forward to getting this new website up. I really am. You're talking about this things to come thing. I realized, this is more of a Stratosphere Lounge question, but the premise of that is that this crisis that we're heading for, this fourth turning, is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before, because that's what they are. And I thought, wow, we're going to need, soldiers, and I was like, who are going to be the soldiers in this war? And you know what word flew into my head? Therapists. You can write this down. I'll put this into definitely into more articulate form in the weeks and months to come. However, if you want to get in on the ground floor of the next huge financial wave, and I'm not kidding about this, I would spend my money on any technology or any store that is about tattoo removal. That is going to be the most requested service ever. I guarantee it. If I had money to put into things, I would. Anybody who was doing like tattoo removal research or something like that, I think the demand for tattoo removal is going to be insanely high, and the foot soldiers in this next conflict are going to be therapists. They're going to be people who can de-escalate violent people and try to motivate people who have been brainwashed into not thinking, not into not thinking about things the right way, just not thinking. Can I get a channel says you can't fix stupid. No, you cannot fix stupid. And then Schmuckmuck says hair dye removal. See, here's the difference between tattoos and hair dye. You can mess up your hair as much as you want to, and if you're a male, you're good in a month and a half, and if you're a woman, a couple of years probably. But you can recover. Can I get a channel says tell that to the Armed Forces tattoo. The Armed Forces tattoos are different. And I don't think it's going to be like the guys who have these, big arms in the sleeves. They're not going to be the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about these 16-year-old girls that have beetles or butterflies or whatever done in black ink, right across their chest. That doesn't look good now, and it's going to look a lot worse very quickly. I really think that's going to be a big deal. But yeah, we're going to need armies of therapists. I think there's going to be a tremendous... I'm just trying to extrapolate forward what I'm seeing now. I've seen so many of these body cam footage things lately. That's my new addiction, so I'm burning through those as fast as I can. And the one thing that every single one of them, I don't think there's been an exception, every single one of the people under 30, most of them are under 25, when they get pulled over or they realize they're going to be arrested, the first thing they say is, I've got to call my mom, or I've got to call my dad, or I've got to call my uncle. I have to call an adult. I don't think there's been an exception to that. I've seen it 30 times. Presumably fully grown people getting pulled over. I'm detecting the alcohol. I detect the smell of alcohol in your breath, ma'am. Would you be willing to do some field sobriety tests? Well, let me call my mom first. No, ma'am, you're a fully grown adult, and you've got your own license. So I'm not going to be talking to your mom. I'm talking to you. And I realize that these people have been so overparented that when their parents die, they're not going to know what to do. And it's a fact of nature, unfortunately, that before you die, and thank you for the super chat there, Steve Gumman, I'll get you in just 1 second there, Rodzilla. You don't just die. These people today who have they've never been allowed to, they've never been told no in their lives ever. That's just that simple. No one's ever said no. Every time they have a temper tantrum, they get what they want. They get it from their family, they get it from their high school, they get it from their colleges, they get it from their employers. Every time they have a temper tantrum, everybody just caves into them. It's not their fault. They're going to run into the big fat no of reality, the big wrecking ball of reality, and there's not going to be anybody to call. And what's even worse than that, it's not far off now where these young people are going to be reaching the age where they're going to be expected to take care of their parents. They can't take care of themselves. I'm talking about a subset of the modern generation. Obviously, there's plenty of endless sea of perfectly fine kids out there. But as a cultural shift, I've never seen anything like it, ever. They are not capable of handling reality, and that's why these police body cam, I put so much stock in these police body cam things, because it's a great example, it's a perfect example of something that's stressful, but it's not enough to it's not the kind of thing that you should end up in a crying fit over. It's almost a perfect kind of thing. Hello, Chris Cadman. Thank you for saying hello. You know what I mean? So a traffic stop should be kind of, oh, damn it, and a DUI stop should be, oh, now I've done it. Now I've done it. But what I'm seeing again and again and again is, first of all, the first stage is just non-compliance. Knock, knock, knock. Hello? Knock, 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 knock. Tap, 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 tap. Hello? And the person not you have to talk to me. I'm not talking to you. You have to get. Could you roll down the window? No, I'm not rolling down the window. Then they finally get them to roll down the window, and you blah blah blah. Smell of alcohol. I need you. Would you be willing to step out of the car, do the sobriety test? I'm not leaving my car. Well, you are leaving your car, man, because you're either going to do the sobriety test and prove to me you're not drunk, or you're going to jail. Well, you can't make me. You don't have my permission to arrest me. I've heard that. I've heard that 100 times now. You don't have my permission. You don't have my consent to arrest me. You can't arrest me. You don't have the legal right to arrest me. Turns out they do. And when this moment comes, and it comes in every one of these things I've seen with younger women, and almost all of them are women, by the way. That's alarming. There comes a moment after they've done the crying bit and I'm just a poor little child bit, or I'm a good person bit, or whatever, where they find themselves in the back of a police cruiser. It's a minivan now, I guess, a SUV or something. And the cop closes the door on them. Baleser says, "Where do you watch best body cam compilations?" If I were you, I'd go to YouTube and I'd search Gen Z traffic stop body cam, something like that. Not to say this isn't entirely a Gen Z problem. There's plenty of footage of people who are either boomers or Gen Xers getting arrested, but it's a different kind of thing. Those people are combative, but they're not calling for their moms. These girls, again and again and again, he's just talking to them at this point, and they just start trembling. It's like, it's all right, just calm down. And I'm listening to these policemen. I can't. If it was one or two of these things, I'd say, well, it's not important. But I've seen it 50 times, where these police are unbelievable. They're just unbelievable how they're bending over backwards for this. Yes, I am a pilot, Chris. Sorry. Back to the body cam thing. They're bending over backwards to it's okay, don't worry, it's not the end of the world, I'm just talking to you. These guys are just, body cams are the best thing that ever happened to the police force, ever. They're the best thing that ever happened to them. It's like cops, but with everybody all the time. And then there comes a point when they're locked in the car, and they're beginning to realize that they can't talk their way out of this or manipulate their way out of this, and mom's not going to come and get them out of this. And they just go one of two ways. They either go into absolute sobbing hysterics, like they've just lost their child, that level of hysteria, or now a lot of these are DUIs, they start kicking the inside of the police car or banging their head against it hard enough to knock themselves out. And that's a therapy problem, and frankly, that's a forever problem. Those kids are never going to be okay. They can live manageable lives with excellent therapy and self-help programs and group therapy and all the rest of it, but they'll never be okay because no one's ever said no to them, and it's too late now. Too late. Just didn't want to miss this. Rodzilla with a super chat says, if you want to see how far we've fallen, read the letter from Black Soldier E.S. Hawkins to Mother when he sentenced to death for fighting white police in Houston in the 1860s. Grammar and cursive is perfect. Yes, because you had to get it perfect. We did an episode of Right Angle not too long ago. It was one of the most hopeful things I ever seen. One of the most hopeful things I've ever seen. But in terms of the meta theory, it's too late. Mississippi, which has always been the laughingstock of the nation, has basically said, well, if you don't pass the third grade reading standards, you don't go to fourth grade, you stay in third grade. Turns out the teachers don't want to teach the student again. The schools don't want to pay for him to go through third grade again, and he doesn't want to go through third grade again. So once they started enforcing the standards, the students rose to the standards. Shocked. I am shocked. So there's that. Yeah, we're going to need, send lawyers, guns, and money. It's going to be send therapists, Prozac, and coloring books. if I didn't care about these kids, or, oh, you're so hard on Gen Z, it's like, if I didn't care about them, I wouldn't care about them. But I just think they've been robbed. And I think it's criminal. And the hard part of this thing to come thing is, the hard part of it is going to be convincing them that it wasn't the boomers that did this to them or Gen Xers that did this to them. It was the liberal boomers and Gen Xers that did them to them. That's going to be the challenge right there. Is making them believe the truth, that we've been fighting against this the whole time, and all we do is get called for, for the big horrible Nazi racists that we are. Okay, here we go. By the way, Chris, you've already asked me if I'm a pilot. I can fly. Yes, I've got my private pilot's license, and I have my instrument rating, and I have just under 1,000 hours of flight time. Let's see what we got here. Tennessee is considering rejecting federal money for education. Now we're talking, see? Now we're talking. That's the kind of thing I want to see. We just opt out. Opt out. I'll talk about this a lot more in Stratosphere Lounge because I've had some thoughts about this things to come thing. All right, let's see what we got. Marusha Clark. Dark. Marusha Clark. Marusha Dark. One of those two. I'm not going to say which. It's important to keep the identity. When The Simpsons was The Simpsons, for those 6 or 7 golden seasons, there's a scene where Skinner's talking to the kids in the auditorium, and he says, and the person I'm talking about, he's, I think it's because Lisa's the one who's preventing him from getting money from schools because of her integrity or something. He says, the person I'm talking about is Lisa S. No, wait, that's too obvious. L. Simpson. And I just thought, man, that's just genius. Okay, here we go. Hi, Bill. Since you come from a theater background, I was wondering what techniques you learned for memorizing lines, or is it largely down to a temperament and a talent? A word I rarely use since most things are a matter of skill. I agree about that. In the case of live action or stage performance, as opposed to voice actor or teleprompt, if a person has poor recall ability, is acting something that's closed off to them? P.S. I know this is Monday, but I just wanted to say that when you're done with the fourth turning, I highly recommend a book called Behold, a Pale Horse by former Navy Intel officer Milton William Cooper. That sounds interesting. Okay, so that actually really does sound very interesting. So, funny you mentioned that, Marusha, because as I was driving around today, I was thinking about this issue. It's one of the things I'm going to be spending a fair amount of time talking with Gary Sinise about, because Gary started kind of a, like one of those 40s movies. Let's put on a show. He and a bunch of friends started a theater. And some of his friends were John Malkovich and people like that. And Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago is just a huge success. And to make that happen is virtually impossible. But the main thing I want to talk to Gary about in terms of that is I want to talk to him about the difference between stage acting and screen acting. So let's just talk about how that works. When I went back to Florida in the 1990s after I graduated there in 82, I'd made a fair number of movies prior to getting to college, and I made some afterwards. So I went back to the University of Florida, and there was a class called Monk in Training, says, wrong, Bill, it's not the liberal boomers and Gen Xers that did this. It's a liberal boomers, Gen Xers, and people who couldn't stand to be called racist. Yes, that's exactly right. Basically, people who ducked when they knew something about them was being a lie, or somebody was saying something they knew was not true, like a man can become a woman, and they didn't say anything. That's where a lot of it is. Anyway, so back to the theater thing. So I went back to the University of Florida, and they were teaching a class there that they didn't have when I was there called Acting for the Camera. And I asked if I could sit in on this, and by then I was doing the comedy show there, and that was working out pretty well. So the teacher, who I did not have a terribly high regard for, based on the fact that she stuck a knife into somebody's pillow, and that kind of person, said, "Sure. In fact, since you've been out in Hollywood and stuff, why don't you come in and just do the class one day, just run a class. So I did. What they were doing in the acting for the camera thing, in accordance with the high standards of this individual teacher, was they would have people come up and do monologues or scenes as we would do in theater, but this time with a camera on a tripod recording it on VHS from the back. I said, this is nothing like movie acting. You're just stage acting with a camera on. That's not movie acting. I said, if you are curious to know what the experience of being an actor in a movie is like, then the one thing I will tell you with absolute certainty is it will bore you out of your mind. You will be bored to tears because you will do nothing but wait and wait and wait. And then when you finally get the shot lit and the mic's in place and the mic shadow is has been taken care of, and the noise from outside the air, when all that stuff is actually working, you're going to go from sitting here bored out of your mind to action, and then you're going to have to deliver. The thing about that I want to talk to Gary about particularly is about, you're asking about memorizing lines. That's a subset of this. What you get in the theater is you get rehearsal. You get a lot of rehearsal, and the reason you get rehearsal is because you don't I have to answer this because Chris Ellisar says, Bill, are you a member of any of the James Blonde projects online? We made movies called James Blonde with my friend Fritz Bronner. That was what we did. We made a bunch of them. I didn't know they were online. That got my attention. Anyway, back to the theater thing. The reason you have to rehearse so much and so intensely in the theater is you don't get do-overs. You don't get to flub a line. You don't get to, how many, every time you've ever seen a blooper, that's a flub line. When you're doing a film before a live audience show like Cheers was or something, you could flub a line because everybody knew that you were watching the recording. You weren't watching a play. You were watching the recording. And since you're there to see the process of them making a TV show, it's actually really great when actors flub a line because you get to see stuff that you didn't see before. So anytime you're in there in a studio audience and the warm-up comedians come out and the actors come out on that particular subset of storytelling on a film before a live audience situation comedy, that is almost a perfect blend between the two. You don't get a lot of rehearsal, but you get 4 or 5 days, and you're allowed to flub your lines. You're just not allowed to flub all of them because if this thing goes well, it's going to be at least 2.5, usually 3 hours, and if it doesn't go well, it's going to be 5, and you can't hold on to people that long. They'll just stop laughing. They may not leave. Some of them will, but they may not leave. So rehearsal. The specific answer to your question is I memorize lines by just reading them back. So if I've got a paragraph, the first thing I'll memorize will be the first 4 words of the paragraph, and then I'll just say those 4 words, and I'll look at what the next words are, and I'll try to remember those, and then I'll get those in line. And once I've got those in line, then I just keep going. So for me, it's just a question of how much can I memorize on this little pass, just this pass. All right, I've got the first 2 sentences down. The good news is every time you repeat those 2 sentences, that gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And usually once you have the lead in, the stuff that follows is much easier to get to. But it's just rote memorization. There's nothing easy about it. I can remember very clearly when, at least 1 year and maybe 2 or 3, I've talked many times about the trips we would make to the U.S. from Bermuda. We'd come once a year, and we'd get to go to all the toy stores and hang out with my awesome cousins up in Plymouth Meeting in Pennsylvania, and all the fun we would have. But on 2 of those, I look forward to that all year. On 2 of those vacations, I can remember those things being spoiled because, well, at least being, dampened by the fact that when I got back to college, I had to have the 8 times, 9 times, 10 times, 11, and 12 times tables memorized. And there's no cure for it. You just have to do it. I can still sing it to myself in my head, 6 sevens are 42. 7 8s are 56. Here are the 4 times tables, here's the 6 times tables, here's the 9 times tables, and just read it again and again and again and again and again. And now I can do fundamental math, multiplication in my head because I just know the answers because I memorized them. From 1 to 12, we had to know those things, and that's the kind of thing I use all the time. I use that every time I leave a tip. I do all kinds of things like that. But rote memorization is a skill set, and like physical exercise, the more you do it, the stronger you get. There are some people out there who have astonishing memories. Now, those people who are actually showmen about memories, those people may in fact be biologically gifted on some way, same way that an athlete is. But memorization is just memorization, and you just have to do it, and there's no quick way around it. The more memorization you do, the faster you get at it. But basically, the process in a theater works like this. You have the auditions, which is really fun. You cast the characters. You have your initial meeting. I don't believe I've ever seen a read-through in a play. I did a lot of plays, just hanging around the edges of it in the theater department. But I saw a lot of plays, and I don't believe I ever saw a table read. That's absolutely standard in television. The first thing you do, especially on a series, is everybody gets together on Monday morning and they've got their new scripts and nobody's seen it before. They just lay them out, and all the actors are around the table and they read their lines in character. And if it's a show like Cheers, or I saw a table read for Futurama once, that is about the most fun you can have. It's just hilarious. You've got these actors reading these lines. They've never, ever, ever seen them before. They read them in the character voice, and then they crack themselves up. It's just brilliant. So the first rehearsal I can remember is not a table read. It's a blocking rehearsal. So you're memorizing your lines as you memorize the blocking. Those two things happen simultaneously. Blocking, for those of you unfamiliar with the term, is your movements across the stage. And on television, and especially in movies, there's a lot less blocking because the camera's doing most of the motion, but you got to block the camera. Somebody did a video. I see so many online videos I can never remember the names or even where I found them, but I saw one that was a breakdown of how, or just like language we were talking about a little bit ago, how the art of blocking has really deteriorated. And the show they were using was I, Claudius, which was a BBC production back in the 70s. It was, I think, one of the very, very first miniseries. Derek Jacobi was Claudius, and Brian Blessed was, might have been Augustus. In any event, because they're so limited, they've got one camera. They use one TV camera. They get such a limited budget. They've got a couple of sets, and they've got their actors, but they've got one camera, and that camera, they have to get as much of it in one take as they can. They don't have the luxury of shooting it from 4 different angles and editing it together. They don't have the time. They don't have the money. So it's basically a weird hybrid of a play and a movie. So they blocked it like a play. It really was like filming a play. And he showed some examples in I, Claudius where it's just really astonishing. It's like a 4 or 5 minute take. That's 4 or 5 minutes. Honestly, I've seen takes that are, by the time you get to 10 seconds, sometimes it's just like, Jesus, can we move this picture along, please? And the reason that these 5-minute takes are so good is because there's so much blocking, there's so much movement. Somebody will come in, the camera will follow them, it'll lead to this guy, he's got his line. Then this woman crosses behind this table, and as she crosses behind the table, the camera moves slightly to the left, watch this other guy come down, they sit down, have a conversation. Camera slides to the right, and the other person gets up, and that move across the room motivates the pan with them, and now we're looking out the window. And it's brilliant. So blocking helps memorization a little bit because not only do you have to remember your lines, but you have to remember where you're standing when you say them. And that's actually kind of useful, as I recall. But it really was just a race, and it's unpleasant, Marusha. It's just not fun. I never knew anybody who had anything other than just despair over the unpleasant fact of theater acting, and that is that you have a limited amount of time somewhere usually about 2 weeks before opening night, but I've seen it a little less than that. But usually somewhere 2 to 3 weeks before opening night, you've got to be off book. And being off book means you've got to know the lines, which brings me to a pet peeve that is one of my all-time pet peeves, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I saw, for example, and this is 10 years old, but if you've seen a sketch on Saturday Night Live called The Californians, it's really funny. But Saturday Night Live, the sight lines don't ever work. All they're doing is reading cue cards. And I don't know if other audience members see it. I don't know if regular people can see it. I'm sure you can. But for me, it's just insane. You know, person's over here and this person's reading their lines that way. And sometimes they'll turn to them and it's like, what, you know? But, and the thing that's most, that really pisses me off about this is that some of these people who were hired for this cast, you know, she comes in as a maid and she's got one line, "Oh, senor, Mr. Rodriguez is here to see you." And she's reading that off a cue card. One line, one. And I understand the show's live and I understand it changes, you know, and so on. But honestly, it's pathetic. It's pathetic that they can't get these things memorized. Every now and then, you'll get a real actor on hosting Saturday Night Live. And when that happens, that person has got their lines memorized. Somebody mentioned in the comment section that Brando was famous about not memorizing his lines, didn't know his lines, and Brando's a brilliant actor, but that's just plain unacceptable. It's just, it's childish and it's pandering. That's part of the job. He needs to know those lines. So they come up with all these cheats, you know, and put lines here or there or whatever, and you know, scratch out a line at the bottom of his coffee cup or something. You have to know your lines. Now, reminds me of another term I haven't heard in a long time. I've been in 2 plays in my life on stage. One of them was Man of La Mancha, where I played, I think I was guard number 3. And I didn't have a single line. It was a musical. I sang, and that was my audition to get the, you know, one of the non-singing roles. And I had a conquistador hat, I had conquistador armor, I had a sword, boots. Boy, when you're wearing like big boots, the costume does so much for your character, it's unbelievable. You would be walking up there in a t-shirt and jeans, and then you're coming down, and they had this horrible body makeup called Texas Dirt, and it just made everybody swarthy, and it just never, you couldn't shower it off. It just stayed with you for weeks. So you've got all this makeup on, you know, paint a mustache on or something like that, and you got this sword in your, you know, swords in your scabbard there, and you're going out, and all these people are prisoners in Man of La Mancha, and you're just supposed to walk around and intimidate them. And man, when you feel those heavy boots, it just, and this weapon, you know, it's like, okay, it really helps. So that didn't teach me anything about line reading. I did endless numbers of scenes in acting classes and directing classes. And the other play I was in was by happy coincidence the first live action play I ever saw. First real play I ever saw was the only play I've ever been in with lines, and that was a play called You Can't Take It With You, which is a comedy. And to my utter astonishment, I found myself playing the romantic lead because no guy showed up for the audition. That meant I had a pretty fair amount of stage time. I was on stage, you know, quite a bit. There were some moments where it's just me and the girl. A couple of moments where we're the only 2 people on stage and we have these scenes. So whether we were doing that or whether we were rehearsing scenes for class, what we often did, in fact frequently did most of our time actually learning stuff, was we would get together with I have a scene with, you know, Denise, let's say. Yeah, Denise, you got any time today? Yeah, I'm free after 4th period. Me too. Okay, great. We'll meet at the Rathskeller, and we'll just glib the lines out. That was the term we used, glibbed. A glib reading is where you don't put any emotion into it. It's literally a line recital from memory. And when you start glibbing scenes out, it means you've got most of it memorized. You still got the book with you, but you start the line. She says a line. You say your line. Then oh, what is it? And you check it. It's like, yeah, correct it. Okay. And the idea is just to get through it as fast as you can. Just like bang, 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 bang. No performance, nothing. You're not wasting time. It's just we go through it again and again and again and again and again. We just run it, run it, run it, run it, run it, run it, run it until we got it down. And then obviously once you're on stage and you're doing the same show every night for 2 weeks, a month, or whatever. So once you got it down, it gets easier to remember. There's a real... I still have the actor's nightmare. And I've only been on stage essentially once. And that was in... When the hell was that? Yeah, that would have been like 1982, 81. I still have nightmares about it. I had a nightmare once where I was in the wings. One of the ones I have frequently, and this I have a planetarium nightmare too. One of them is I'm in Los Angeles or something, and I need to be on stage in 45 minutes in Miami, and it's horrible. But the actor's nightmare is you are out there on stage and you forget your lines. And you're standing there and everybody's looking at you. You know the audience is looking at you, but the people you're really concerned about are your other actors who are waiting for you to stop embarrassing them, and just because you can actually, I've never seen it happen, but you can actually end a performance in front of a paying audience if you don't know your lines. That's the stakes. You don't get a retake. There's almost always a stage manager where if somebody's really in desperate trouble, they can literally under breath say line and they'll read it to them. But that is the lowest depths of incompetence, and I've never seen anybody do that on stage. I've never heard. As the rehearsals process goes on, and now you're going through this thing again and again and again, and you're working it, and blocking is good. You're sitting there, and there's a period there where everybody's just getting off book, and the guy will read his lines and get through and then in a line, and then the assistant director will say blah, 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 yeah, and go on. To give you an idea of how catastrophic that can be, because you don't get the do-overs or you don't get to fix it in post. Act 3 of You Can't Take It With You, the center character is this grandfather. It's a wacky family. It's a wacky family meets a completely straight family. I'm like the son of this business tycoon, and I'm this young handsome guy, and and I'm very conservative and very very kind of New England white, kind of unemotional, perfectly dressed kind of thing. And their family, the girl who I'm falling for, her family is just a nut house. They're just completely insane, genuinely insane. And Granddad is kind of the center figure of this. So we had a guy who was an older guy named Tom. I don't remember his last name, but Tom wasn't a bad actor, actually. But he had some memory problems. And what I remember about that is we were doing a performance one night, and I can tell you when this was. It was in November of 1980, because this is the show where the stage manager came in hysterics just before we went on, saying the election's over, Reagan's won, we're all going to die in half an hour because of the Soviet nuclear attack that was coming. But Act 3 begins with me and Grandpa, then everybody else comes on, and then Grandpa and I have a couple lines, and then the play ends. And it's probably a 30-minute third act. And I come out there, I say my line, he says his line. I say my line, he says his line. I say my line, and he says a line from the end of the show. The entire third act is gone. He just gives me the line from the end of the show. And now I'm writing dialogue impromptu. And it's words to the effect of, yeah, that's true, Grandpa, But what we were talking about just a minute ago, and just trying to just cover this thing up and get him back on track. He munched a line once that caused us to cry. We were laughing so hard. And laughing on stage is also one of the, where you're not supposed to laugh, that kind of, Tim Conway, Boy, my memory's really off tonight. Harvey Korman kind of laugh, where you know you're not supposed to laugh. That makes it even funnier. But we were on stage once, and there's a scene where these FBI agents come in, and Grandpa says, "What's the boy done, officer?" And by this point, this guy had a reputation for munching lines. So we're in the middle of this thing, and it's a climax of the first act or second. Anyway, so fireworks are going off and everything, and FBI guy comes in, and Grandfather turns to him and says, "What's the officer done, boy?" And everybody turns upstage. I think this would be a good time for my character to look out the window. So it's completely different. The reason that, and it's such a different kind of acting that it really should have its own word. There should be a different word for acting on stage and acting in a movie, because they are so fundamentally different. I'm really looking forward to talking to Gary about this. The play works because everybody has rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. You have to know it by heart, which means that you've got to have already wrung all of the emotion out of it. You are going to manufacture you don't get to be in character on stage. You know what I mean? You don't. You have lines that you have to memorize. You don't get to be a method actor on stage and just remember one or two lines and then you get the next one in the next cut. You've got to have the whole show memorized. And so it actually suits the style of acting, because when you're acting on stage, your facial expressions have to be read not by the person in the front row. Your facial expressions have to be read by the person in the back row. You try that kind of emoting with the camera here instead of 40 yards away. When the camera's here, you can do something with just a wink, just a slight, just a little tiny little raise of the eyebrows. In fact, you can really say a lot on camera just by relaxing the muscles of your face in a certain way. If you do that on stage, nobody can see it. If you do stage acting on camera, it's like, what? So they're completely different animals. Now, in movies and any episodic TV shows, which are essentially shot like movies, like CSI or something like that, you're expected to know your lines, but you don't have to know them all at once. You've got a scene that you're going to go do, and you know you're going to do this scene, so really you can just memorize this scene, and if you make a mistake, then we'll just, when the camera's rolling and it's clear that the actor's not completely stuck, he just flubbed his line, they just keep going. You'll just reread the line, nothing stops. And the ultimate form of that is somebody like Brando, who just memorizes one line at a time, and you just simply cut around him, which I have nothing but contempt for. So yeah, it's just rote memorization, and I had to do that last on the Cold War series, because while almost all of that was read to the teleprompter, almost all of it, every one of those episodes had one or two shots that were tracking shots. They had a remote crane, so the camera's on a crane, and so the camera can start off here, and it just kind of flies past me and then goes and focuses in on the TV set behind me there. Now, that camera doesn't have a teleprompter on it, and even if it did, by the time it gets to here, I can't read it anymore. So those two or three lines or a paragraph or two, those I'd have to memorize. And I do them right on the spot, and I just walk around the set by myself and just go through it again and again, read it over until you get it. Hopefully that's enough of the basics. We'll talk about this some more with somebody like Gary, who knows what he's doing. Excellent question, Marusha Dark, says Road Rider. Bill, I saw you speak in Monterey pre-pandemic, and in spite of power outages, torrential rains, a loud generator, and an overloaded power strip that began to smoke, you somehow overcame all of that and turned it in a pretty powerful speech. I remember that event very well. The question: are there any speaking events in the future, or are you too busy, or for other reasons? Bonus question: a sneak peek behind the curtain. When you do a speaking event, does the host cover your travel expenses, accommodations, and the speaking fee? Yes. So let me take these in this order. When I did that speech, the Mitt Romney speech, the we're going to send F-18s over, Benghazi, and I want them breaking every window in Benghazi. They can bill us. That speech, that got seen by a lot of people, and that was really, really pretty much the height of the Tea Party movement. We just lost the election in 2012, and everybody's sore and stinging. I had been doing speaking events fairly frequently at that point, but after that thing, it just exploded. And I remember for the first 6 months, I was out of town every weekend except for two. I spent 2 weekends at home in a 6 month period. I was on the road all the time. The most challenging speaking event that I've done, the worst speaking event that I've ever done, was at a Lincoln Club in San Diego, and that was awful because I had a podium, I had a microphone, huge crowd, hundreds and hundreds of people in there, but they had me talking while they were serving lunch. So I don't memorize my lines. I've got 4 or 5 little note cards about the topics I want to talk about, and usually I just pretty much know what I'm going to do. I'll tell you about that process in a minute. But I was in front of this Lincoln Club dinner, and as I start talking, they're serving lunch, and I ordered the fish. I didn't order clink, 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 tank, tank. They're having conversations over here. That was horrible. That was by far the hardest thing I had to do because it kept breaking my concentration. Nobody's paying attention, and kind of listening. There's conversation going on. It was really disrespectful, actually, and I basically from that point said, I don't care when you put me on. I'm just not going on while people are eating, period. I did a speaking event in Anaheim 2 weeks ago, 3 maybe, which was the most challenging thing I think I may have done ever. It was at a restaurant. I've been to a number of events at restaurants, a back room, and they got a private thing. So restaurants themselves are not bad. But this one, I had a wireless mic. I didn't have a podium. That hurts. I just generally put those cards on the podium. And the podium can be a really nice prop. You can really use the podium if you really get good at this. There are times when you can just kind of lean on the podium. You take a step back. Podium's real nice. Didn't have one. So I'm holding my cards. That was a little awkward. But the worst of it by far was about 1/3 of the people were inside this back room in the restaurant, and then there were these sliding glass doors that led to the patio outside, and 2/3 of the audience was seated outside at this huge mall with all of this traffic going back and forth. And I had to stand on the rails of that sliding door, so I'm talking to people who are outside that way, 2/3 of the audience, and I'm talking to people who are inside this way, 1/3 of the audience. And all the while there are people walking and talking and a couple people making small fuss just for a moment. And I actually was real proud of that. I did that. That's where I first did some of the things to come stuff. That was really challenging. My favorite event by far is at Ramona. I do it every year. Although they say that they don't think they have the money for it this year, and I don't charge a whole lot of money. I think that the grassroots conservative movement's certainly not what it was during the Tea Party days. My speaking events have gone essentially to zero, and they were in decline prior to the pandemic, but since the pandemic, I don't think I've done 3 of them. So that was a significant damper on things. And a fair part of why the speaking events largely dried up was because I just flat out refused to do colleges after my experience with Malibu Trotsky in East Texas of all places. I have no desire. I've watched Mike Knowles do it, Ben Shapiro do it. and they go to these places, and there's a large contingent of people that are there chanting or trying to shut them down, and they argue with them, and some of the clips of them shutting them down are just brilliant. Candace Owens, all of it. And what they show from the speech is the questions and answer afterwards, and I didn't mind the question and answer so much, but the constant disruptions coming from people who were there to shut you down. I just said, I just don't need this. I don't need it. I really don't. I don't have the skin for it. It's just too enraging for me, and I don't, and really, I remember thinking, I'm not really here as a speaker. I'm more of a therapist or a target, maybe. I'm I'm a literal straw man. My job is to stand there and have people hurl insults at me and the things I believe in. It's just like, I just don't need to do this anymore. I really don't. I'm done. And so I haven't done a college since 6-7 years now, something like that. And when you were talking about the power outage and the torrential rains, loud generator, all that stuff, I remember that event very well. That didn't bother me because when I do these speaking events, I never ever have lines. I have like little modules, and I'll plug those together, but all of it's all impromptu. And when I look down at my notes, it's not a line note. It's just like, okay, now talk about, body cam footage. And then I just talk about body cam footage. So the reason that I stay focused most of the time is because I really believe this stuff. And I believe in it. And I'm as excited about it as people are. And that can be, you can definitely get that across to an audience. One of the things about live acting that I want to talk to Gary about is the feedback loop that occurs between an actor and the audience, or the cast and the audience, and also, this is also true for a speaker in the audience. There is such a thing as a hot room, and there's such a thing as a cold room, and it dramatically affects your performance. I've never had a cold room lower my performance, because I'm just good at this, and I know what I'm talking about. At least I pretend to. So I've never had a cold room make me worse than average, but I've had several occasions where a hot room really makes me, everybody's having a good time. That is a great feeling, that hot room feeling where when you see it on stage with actors, they'll put a little more punch into their lines, or they'll play around a little bit more. And the more they play, the more the audience likes it. The more your confidence goes up, the more you play, and it's just this tremendous positive feedback loop. It's just great. But I had people ask me, where'd you learn how to do this? And I don't really know. Some acting background. But looking back on it, I realized it probably started in the Miami Planetarium when I was doing 45-minute star lectures it's off my head, top of my head. One thing I do, last thing on this question about the speaking thing, is that I think universally for the last 80 or 90% of the speaking time I've done, I don't write those notes until I'm at the venue. If it's a dinner event, I'll write the notes while they're serving dinner. I'll just say, excuse me. I really want to see the room, and I want to get a feel for the crowd. I want to listen to what they're saying before I go on. And I know basically what I'm going to talk about. When I went down to the event in San Diego, I knew I was going to talk about the fourth turning, and also what I thought was coming and what I thought we could do about it. And I had that pretty blocked out. A number of people have asked me, do I ever get stage fright? The smallest audience I've ever done was 3 people. It was an outdoor event, and it was running something like 3.5 hours long. And I was sitting there in the sun in my jacket and suit, and I was just sweating like crazy, and it was some tea party thing early. And I think there were 3 or 4 people there. And just before I went on the stage, I remembered thinking, well, these people deserve the best speech I've got, whether they are sitting among hundreds of people or not, doesn't really matter. They're here and they're waiting, so let's just give them the best you got. And I thought I did really well that night. Biggest one I've ever done was probably 3 or 4,000, I think. And people say, "Do you ever get nervous?" It's like, no, I really don't. I never had stage fright at all, which is good because it can be debilitating. I've seen some really great actors who just cripple them. I've never had it, and the thing that's kind of interesting about that is, again, when I step out there, I don't really know what I'm going to say. I really don't. I know what I'm going to talk about, but I don't know what I'm going to say. I'll use a lot of things that worked before, lines that worked before, got a laugh or something, but I go out there without a script because there is no script. I just do it, kind of like I'm doing it now. And so I just, I have had, the closest I've come to stage fright was on a couple of occasions. I had been so tired, just physically sleepy, that I was snoozing backstage right up to the point where they were doing the introduction. I mean, I was just plain out of it. And I actually, a couple times there, it wasn't stage fright, but I was like, man, you're going to have to go out there and you're going to have to wake these people up, and you can't keep your eyes open. This could be a real problem, because sometimes you got, half an hour before you go on, you're just backstage. And I remember sitting in it was a big room and a large crowd, and it was, curtains and there was a backstage area, and I was sitting in a folding chair, and I was leaning back against the wall, and I was falling asleep, and they're like doing the beginning of my introduction, and I was really kind of concerned about it. But then I reminded myself that the second you walk out there, the adrenaline will take over, and that's exactly what happens. And I just walk out there, and I'm pretty sure that every single public event I've ever done, I've done hundreds of them, I'm pretty sure that every single one of them starts out with, "Hi, everybody." I think it's not exactly a catchphrase, but that's how I start. Markyman says, "Did you ever eat a bat live on stage?" No, I didn't. Never ate a bat live on stage. I had to eat 30 bats when I had to eat a bat in a movie scene. We couldn't get the take right. The lighting was bad. I had to, just time and time again, it said fresh bat had to be brought in, You can't reuse the bat. But never did it on stage. So let's see what else we got here. Jacob Belchek, I feel like I shorted you so badly in the last Stratosphere Lounge, so I'm happy to do this. Hail Bill, hail Jacob. What are your thoughts on modern concept of headcanon? On one hand, I see a blatant rejection of new sequels to beloved... I've never heard the term headcanon before, but I think I'm liking it. I see the blatant rejection of new sequels to beloved IPs, intellectual properties, mostly from the right. From the left, I see a strange ability to project traits onto media that simply aren't there, usually by insinuating deviant sexuality onto characters that were not written that way. I am so with you on this, Jacob. Man. Are these interpretations valid? No. How much gatekeeping do you think is reasonable to prevent the transformation of IPs into apostles for wokeism while still allowing artistic freedom? Rigid. I'll get to all this in a second. I know this is textbook stolen valor syndrome, but the internet is packed with bought-in wokeists who genuinely believe the version of the story that they've created over the thing that actually exists. How do you address that kind of malleable grip on reality? Also, this officially marks my 1-year membership. You're worth every penny, Bill. Keep it up. Thank you very much for that, Jacob. Thank you for support, as with all of our members. Yeah, so this is the age we live in. We live in the age of talentless writers, and they're talentless for the same reason that they break into sobbing fits when they get pulled over for a traffic ticket. By the way, I didn't mention this, but they either go the crying route or the furious route, and usually both. But the one thing that I see again and again and again from women drivers that are 23, 24, surrounded by policemen, and they're like, I'm just really scared. I'm really, really scared. What are you scared about, ma'am? It's like, I'm just scared. You guys scare me. Okay. If this scares you, it makes me wonder what the sound of artillery might do. But nevertheless, you get it. So, and Unlimited Hornet Works beat me to it. They're talentless because they have no life experience. Exactly. They have no life experience. If the target of the educational system was to create people that voted Democrat by cutting them off from their own history and cutting off their ability to think for themselves, because if you can think for yourself, you'll at least listen to the other side of the story. And if you listen to the other side of the story, chances are pretty good we can flip you. So what that ends up being is a lifetime of safe spaces. And what the people out there, what these students are out there protesting, the green hairs with the nose rings, they're not protesting Ben Shapiro and they're not protesting Mike Knowles. They're not even protesting the things they're talking about. The emotion that's driving them is they are protesting against the idea of hearing something that they don't agree with. That is what they're protesting. That's what they are absolutely, that's what gets them torqued, is I don't agree with this and I don't want to hear it. I want it stamped out because I don't want to go through the emotional, it's not to me a great deal of emotional pain, but that's because I haven't been protected from it. I don't want to go through the emotional pain of having my beliefs challenged, and I have so little confidence in my beliefs that they must be rigidly, constantly repeated, and anybody that breaks that up is going to destroy my personality and my image of myself. So burn at the stake. That's what drives these kids, and the problem with that is, well, there's a lot of problems with that, but one of the problems is if you're constantly protected from unpleasantness as a generational cohort, there's not an awful lot of writing you can do if you haven't done anything in life. Most of the motivation for writing that I've run into from other people is a desire for karmic justice. That's what motivates most of the writers I know. A desire for cosmic karma justice. Something you did or you experienced something and you thought it was unfair and you're going to correct it. And I'm going to correct it by telling the story the way I wanted it to happen. The classic example of this are John Hughes movies. John Hughes was obviously a giant nerd, and I love John Hughes movies. Giant nerd when he was in high school. And so all these movies where the nerd gets the girl is John Hughes basically fixing history, fixing his personal history to make it what he wanted it to be, where the girl is attracted to the big, muscular, beefy oaf who treats her badly, but in the end, she spends enough time around the nerdy guy to realize, hey, this guy's really got a beautiful soul, and I'm going to end up, fall in love with him and going out with him. It never happened that way. It's never, ever once happened that way. Never once. No one has ever moved from the friend zone into the bedroom. It's never happened. And the reason that the friend zone idea is so pervasive now is because there have been so many movies where it did happen. They're all lies. It's like you might as well be talking about people that can levitate. It doesn't happen that way. That's not how it works. And so if you've never had any conflict or experiences, then you've got nothing to write about. I mean, when I wrote that scene I was talking about earlier where Bill Elder just, is weeping and hoping nobody sees him and trying to get away from his friend. Luke is doing everything he can to cheer him up, and what Elder wants is he wants him to go away. He doesn't want him to see this. He doesn't want to be seen like this. He's just been unmanned in there, and now he's behaving like a child in his mind, like a girl, crying about it. It's unacceptable, and he doesn't want to be seen, And the only reason you can write a scene like that is if you actually had that happen to you, and it's happened to me a bunch. So since they can't write anything on their own, And since whatever they have written, nobody wants to see, the story of our age for the last 10 years, I would say, just about right. The story of the last 10 years, and maybe even a little longer, is we don't have any talent because we don't have any life experience. We don't believe in anything. We have there's nothing in the world that we believe in. We are against a lot of things. We're pretty much against everything, but there's nothing we're really for. So we're not carrying a torch for anything. So we've had no experience. We've got no passion about something. We've got no cause that we're trying to promote. And I don't count social justice because I don't consider social justice to be let's go out and achieve this thing. I consider it to be just the world's most flagrant form of passive-aggressive cowardice. So these are the people that are now in decision making and writing and directing these movies. So nobody wants to see it. They don't know what they're doing. They don't do the research. They don't know the background. They've never read things, so they don't know anything about it. And the only way that they can have the social influence that they want is to insert their larva into Star Trek, Star Wars, or whatever else the case may be. So let me just tell you about what just happened here. Because I'm going to have to stop the show right now. About 2 months ago, I woke up and I had this unbelievably sharp, localized pain at the root of my left tooth. All these teeth are artificial. They took the teeth roots and ground them down, so these are all factory-made teeth, and I haven't had teeth problems since then. But 2 months ago, I went to bed just fine. I woke up, and there was a sharp, localized pain right at the root of this tooth. And I didn't know what it was, but it must have come from me having a nightmare or something, because I didn't punch myself in the face. Just must have clenched down enough to crack the root of an incisor, and those are pretty strong, and it hurt. It wasn't a toothache. It wasn't like that. It was just, I could feel it. Something in there. I thought my tooth was loose, but it wasn't. And then the pain went away. I didn't think anything of it. And then I was at a restaurant 3 days ago, over the weekend, Saturday. Yeah, Saturday. I was at a restaurant on Saturday. I was having chicken wings, and I didn't bite into anything particularly hard. I just took a bite, and next thing I know, something's funny. And this entire tooth came off. It just came off. Because I had, in fact, cracked the root of that tooth. And I will leave this to your imagination, but I am not going to be seen missing an incisor because it is shocking. So I went to the dentist, great guy. Saw him on, when did I see him? A couple days ago. And so what he's done is he's drilled into the artificial tooth and drilled a little ways up into the bone, the tooth that's still in the skull there, and he's put a little metal post there, and he used temporary cement on it. And then I'm going in on Wednesday. He's going to drill deeper up and deeper down, and then he's going to use permanent cement. But the reason I'm going to end the show right now is because in the middle of that last sentence, this thing just came off, and I've been feeling that it was loose, a long time. So, dentist said if it comes off, he could just put it back on again, and that's fine. But no, I don't want that. If it comes off now, I won't be able to explain why I'm stopping the show. Yeah, it's bad. It's really, it's shocking. So I'm going to have to wrap this one up early. I hope I got the gist of that for you, Jacob, and I'm sorry to have to cut this away, but yeah, that's not a pleasant thing. That's like, some things you just don't want to have happen, and I don't want that to have happen. It's just gone. So we're going to get permanent cement on it, and going to make the post deeper and glue it on. Hopefully that'll work. But until then, that's it. So sorry to make it, make you more human. It is genuinely horrifying. So I'm going to have to wrap this up. Anyway, so thanks everybody for being here and listening. It's always fun for me to, and instructional for me to work out these problems with you guys kind of in advance, and talk about the process, because I answer a lot of my own questions that way, and very grateful for all the support we've gotten since Things to Come came out in the last week. Very, very grateful. And this show's made possible by the members of BillWhittle.com, who, as you know by now, make all of this stuff happen. We've seen a surge, and I think we're going to see a very, very big surge when we get to these interview shows. The main thing I'm excited about with getting this Frank Luke thing done is I'm really, 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 really burning to get back onto the Major Mace Mattingly thing. I just love doing that. I just have so much fun doing it. I just had to drop it completely. So the Luke script continues in probably another week, I guess, now that I'm not having to stay here all night. So we'll have some have a permanent glue in there on Thursday night, and that should do it. So I'm going to just kind of sign off here now, and thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next Monday right here on your very own Stratosphere Studio. Hooray! And that's those Twitch losers gone. And now for our happy YouTube crowd, thanks very much for joining us on YouTube, and we will see you next week as well.